There we go.
Recording is set, and I will take roll call visually.
Thanks so much. Well, thank you for another legislative-focused work session as we deal with the surprisingly large number of education-related bills in a pandemic, and just also recognizing or just commenting that this is pretty challenging when a lot of our district has been focused on opening schools and providing supports, both social and emotional supports and academic supports for kids due to the pandemic and also due to the recent events in Boulder. So this is certainly a challenging time for us to manage the quantity of bills that are coming. But, and so I'm thankful that we're all able to take this time to look at 3 bills. I'm going to start with the 2 that I think will be quickest. The first one is the statewide accountability audit bill, which we sent over. And this is more of an FYI, but I just wanted to let people know about it because, again, it's a bill that's not specifically called out in our, well, it's sort of called out in our legislative platform. So we do talk about testing in our platform and accountability, and we look in general for local control and to minimize the amount of standardized statewide testing with an emphasis on local formative assessments. So this is a bill that is going to look at the statewide system, but it's interesting in that when you get to the end of the bill, it talks about whether the statewide system is adequately addressing the level of classroom instruction, which is pretty interesting. And I'll be curious how they do that from a statewide perspective. And I know that Kathy, with her passion for assessment, has been interacting with this bill a lot as she finds out more about it. And I wasn't sure if Kathy or Kathleen wanted to speak to it at all.
I'll let Kathleen go first.
I was just going to ask you to go first, Kathy, because this is not one I've spent a huge amount of time with. I'm so sorry.
That's okay. This bill still makes me really nervous. I have to say, I think, at least in my opinion, our accountability system needs to be reformed, and I'm not sure this is the way to do it. I think doing the pilots, which Boulder has been a part of doing a pilot, is a good way to go about it. I worry that we are going to get a lot of unintended consequences from this bill that could send us off on different tangents for a while and just put off the good work of trying to figure out how we want to reform our accountability and assessment system. And for Tina to say I've spent a lot of time on this is kind of an understatement because the original bill was awful. And so a few things that we've added in is that it should be a mutual accountability system. That's how it was designed. So the language I think is still in there, but they're having another stakeholder meeting this afternoon that says, is the state holding up what it's supposed to be doing as part of the accountability system? I know that they hate that, so we'll see if that language stays. It should not, I have to say, it should not have been this hard. They've been trying to get this bill going for a couple of years. The way it started was it was looking at accountability and accreditation. Because one of our districts doesn't feel like the accreditation system is fair, because it feels like districts like ours and others around us that have the resources and the money to have very high accreditation levels shouldn't be held to the same standard as smaller rural districts that can't offer the same program. And I have a lot of anxiety about changing that because you can't hold a system, you can't do accreditation based on resources, I don't think. So where it is right now, Tina, I would recommend we just stay neutral and see where it ends up, because I think it's still got some language that they want to take out. There's still some language that might need to be added, and it's just too soon to take a position on it. Does that help? Give us some background. I mean, they also have language in there about looking at our whole statewide system of standards, which we've done, and I don't understand why it's in there. So I think we just stay neutral for now.
Okay, any questions about the bill? Bill, what's Case doing these days with this? Do you know?
I can look that up in 2 seconds.
I forgot to go to the case tracker.
I can tell you, Tina, that Case is doing this parent engagement that they're trying to do with CASB. I don't remember what it's called. This is one of the 3 bills they're looking at. And last week when they had the parent engagement conversation, that group has dwindled from about 80 down to about 20. And it's kind of hard because they couldn't have a conversation about this bill because it still hadn't even dropped. But it's one of their 3 bills. One was on assessment, one was on this audit bill, and the other is on giving more time for READ Act compliance. So those are their 3 main focuses for parents.
It's called the Parent Advocacy Network.
Yeah, thank you. See, I always want to call it
Yeah.
PEN, which is when I do searches, I pull up PEN instead of the wrong thing.
It's PAN.
PAN.
What's the number on the audit bill?
I don't know if it has a number yet.
581 is what it says.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah, 21-0581. Oh, no, that may not be the bill number.
No.
No, that's legislative legal services number. Never mind.
I know last year's number was HB 2012-95. That's any help to anyone.
Has it not been introduced officially?
No,
I don't think
that's
so.
where they're still.
Yeah, Case won't take a position on it until it's officially been introduced.
Okay.
Yeah, the draft I have doesn't have a number on it.
Is everyone okay with the neutral position until we find out more? Kitty?
Yeah, I'm okay with it. I really appreciate, Kathy, you explaining it more, because I read it and I thought, well, is this a good thing or is this not a good thing? I mean, I don't like the way the state accountability works, but I wasn't sure if this was the right fix. So I appreciate your expertise on that.
Well, thanks, Kitty. It really helps to have someone else look at it and kind of come to the same conclusion. Like, what are we trying to do here, right? And where do we hope to end up? I don't think it's very clear.
Any other questions or comments? No? Okay. The next bill I just wanted to talk about again briefly because we didn't call it out in our legislative platform is the one about whether you need to share candidate background and information before hiring someone if you get down to 2 or 3 people. So for those of you who are part of the superintendent search or those who followed the search for the president of CU, the law currently has it so that if we get down to a small group, let's say 3 or 4 people, we need to make those candidates public and then have a public process around it. And of course, that creates more engagement with the community, more transparency. But the other thing it does, which if I recall correctly, is it definitely is a deterrent to some highly qualified candidates. And the general narrative is people who are doing well at their job and who are liked by their communities probably won't leave because the people who are hiring them will be upset to find out that they're looking. And this was something that when we went through the superintendent process, which, you know, turned out great for us with going down to 2 candidates, it was concerning. And I thought it was, and I did feel like, hey, there are people that aren't applying to our job because they don't want to be in our state. They're going to have all of this done publicly, and they might lose their job in order to apply, not even get our job. So I personally am very supportive of this bill because I think it will increase the caliber of candidates coming to Colorado. That being said, I appreciate that the community likes to hear about candidates and be a part of it. There's a trade-off. There's no question. But I guess my tendency is to try to get high caliber candidates into the state. So, but I'd like to hear what other people think about this one.
I agree with you, Tina. I've heard enough stories to be concerning of not even candidates wanting to come from out of state, but even wanting to move around in Colorado. And as soon as their boards find out they've applied for a job, they're fired. And I just think I get the trade-off as well, but I support this. I support this bill because I just think it'll increase candidates being willing to step forward.
I agree with that. And I think we can explain to the public, because we know Boulder, we talked about this in the search committee, that we know our community wants everything to be open. But if they can understand that we or any district may not get, some of the best candidates because of the the openness of the process, that's not doing us any favors. Our districts need to be able to hire the best people, not the people who can afford to take the risk.
And I think too, it's important to know that though public school systems operate under a different set of rules, but in the science and technology industry, when headhunters or corporations are seeking out experienced candidates, and my son just moved from one position to another, so he went through an extreme process of saying, I really don't want this put out to my employer. I'm happy to interview with you. So same applies within a lot of industries.
Any other thoughts, or is everyone okay with us proceeding with a position of support on this one?
Can I ask Rob what he thinks?
Sure.
Well, first of all, I wouldn't have changed anything about the process here in Boulder Valley School District. I think that worked out great. I do. It's a balance, right? To one extent, you want to make sure that that boards, and whether it's a board of regents or school boards, have heard from their community on the aspects and qualities of what they're looking for in a leader, right? And then as boards, as elected officials, one of your most important jobs is to make sure that you have a superintendent or a CEO to be able to fulfill the vision, mission, and goals of the school district. Undoubtedly, you will be able to attract more candidates with a less open process, because you'll have folks that will be that might not specifically know that they want to go to a certain place, but are, to Donna's point, are recruited. They've gotten a call and they'll look into it to see if it's a fit or not. So I think that by supporting this, again, it's the trade-off. Can school boards or other entities do the right amounts of engagement to understand the type of leader that they're looking for? Can the search firms and districts make sure that there's a very thorough background check and understand the candidates that are actually that they're looking at? And I think that in other states where this is the case, I think that there are in an environment where, speaking of superintendents, there are just less and less qualified people that are looking to do the job, and there's more and more vacancies, as we've seen throughout this pandemic, and especially here in the state. And so I think supporting this makes good sense.
Well, and I remember getting criticism from the community of why didn't we have a woman who was a finalist? And the answer was, we didn't get applications that, from women who were the same caliber as, Rob and the other finalists.
I just hope we can frame it in a way that's not, this is less open. So we'll have to have Randy, because I don't see it necessarily that way, because there's still all the community engagement and input into what we're looking for. It's just protecting people's jobs and current status. That is what I think we're talking about. I think we're not talking about making it less open.
Kathleen?
I just want to point out there is language in this bill that says even if all of the finalist names aren't disclosed, people can still learn of the race and gender of those finalists. So there is still the ability to look at that from an equity lens that I think has been really important to this board, and maybe something to highlight if the board is supporting the bill.
But then another piece of that is, are the people who represent diverse populations are the ones that happen to apply, do they have the characteristics and qualifications that we want? So we could still get dinged for, not having somebody of color, woman who just weren't completely qualified for the job.
I
Yeah.
like the point that Rob made, that a lot of applicants really look into what our district wants and needs, and to decide if they're a fit or not.
I just think it's really important to the idea of losing your job is pretty significant to apply to another job. And I feel that if we remove that fear, we should attract a more diverse pool of candidates. So I would think that those might go hand in hand. Just if we can get more people in the door, I could see where someone, would just be too fearful of that and want security more than a change. And I think if we can take that out of the equation, we'll just get a more diverse group.
Sometimes even within the school district, I just want to point out, there was a time I switched jobs from one department to another, and it was really, it was difficult because there was one department wanted to keep me, and to let them know I was looking to switch to another department became a little bit of a controversy when people found out.
Any other thoughts on this, or should we move on to 182? Okay, so the next bill is SB 182. And again, this bill is going to keep evolving. I just touched base with Ernestine right before this meeting, and she'll have another update tonight on the timeline and what has changed since then, since we got the amendment. I think we got the amendments on Saturday morning. So it is really tricky because there's so much in this bill, and I think there's so much feedback happening from so many places that to some extent, and I think the timeline keeps being pushed back, so we don't have to jump in quite as quickly or as aggressively than I think we had to, because there's so many other groups weighing in on SB 182. So the urgency is perhaps not there, like for today. It is in general. So I didn't know if it did. Kathleen Sullivan, did you want to speak a little bit about the changes and your thoughts, or?
I'm happy to summarize the changes that I see in the draft that we looked at over the weekend. The bill has been updated to reflect our suggestion that they allow the UIP process to be the process that's followed, which I think is a big improvement. I think they missed our technical revision when we were talking about the data to be collected. We had asked that they substitute arrests for referrals to law enforcement, since we really track referral information and it's the DA and law enforcement that track arrests. So they added the language about collecting data on referrals, but they didn't yet remove arrests. So that's probably something we'll want to pay attention to.
Donna, mute.
I am.
So I think that there have been just some language improvements, I would say, in the middle section that I didn't think were really substantive. And then the big section that they amended is the one that the board has been talking about, 2232-146. It starts on page 14 of the new bill. They've added a lot of introductory language in that first paragraph that introduces some new standards. So they say, except in exigent circumstances in which an immediate arrest is needed to address criminal activity that poses an imminent threat of serious bodily injury. So they've added that language around exigent circumstances and an immediate arrest. I think still incorporating the requirement for serious bodily injury throughout this section is one that continues to be an area of concern from my perspective around safety. And they made some other edits to that section. I don't know, Rob, if you want to talk about that, or if you want me to continue in this area. There is a new requirement that they've added in this text that I think is really troubling at the top of page 17, where the language of the bill now says that law enforcement is only using that arrest or summons authority. And starts on line 4, when at the discretion of both the school resource officer or law enforcement officer and the school principal. So it requires this joint decision of law enforcement and our school leadership that wasn't in the first draft. I'm really concerned about that piece because we try and keep very clean and clear on those decision points, so that we know if it's a school decision or a law enforcement decision, because we have different standards. And then really the rest of this section, they did not amend the list of offenses. And I know that's something the board's had some conversation about. The other piece that I don't see is in here yet is our recommendation that this language not be waivable by charter schools. So I think the idea is in there, but it isn't sufficiently articulated in statute right now, I think, to have that clean requirement that the board had discussed.
Can I ask a question, Kathleen, on page 32? I know this is sort of persnickety, and it's under 7 in Roman numerals and then the parenthesis of 3. And this is on the funding piece, which I have some concerns about in general. But the first is, there is a paragraph there that talks about fiscal year 2009, 2010. And I'm wondering what that refers to. You're on mute.
Sorry. This is the section about grant funding for alternative programs for kids who've been expelled. So I think the changes are really just around how the grant operates. And the grant program has been in effect since at least 2009, 2010.
Okay, and then another clarifying question is, are any of the grants are all one time, and they didn't say whether it's a 1-year grant or a 3-year grant? Because it's looking like all one-time money, not ongoing supports for mental health counselors, behavior interventionists, et cetera. Am I reading that correctly?
I do think you're reading it correctly for what the bill does right now. I'm not sure how that operates in reality. The language originally around the grant program talked about a pilot program, which is why I think it feels more like that one-time money. I do know that we have a program operating this year that's using what we call the EARS grant. And that we have received quite a bit of money under that grant. Bill may have the specifics on it for the ALPS program.
Okay, Kitty, I'll go to you and then.
Yes, I just want to make sure I'm looking at the correct document, because you emailed one and then there's one in board docs and they're not the same. So is it the one you emailed? Is that the most current one?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. One issue I have, and it's not something we can do something about, but in their findings, they talked about arrests of children starting at kindergarten. Well, the age of culpability is 10. So how do you arrest a kindergartner? So do you know anything, Kathleen, about that?
Yeah, this is again new language, and I was not surprised by it. I think they're trying to really articulate the justification and the reason for the bill. So that reference is to both tickets and arrest. I don't know that law enforcement would even ticket a student, but that's the way they've written it.
So somebody who's younger than the age of culpability can get a ticket but can't get arrested?
I know they can't get arrested, and I'd be shocked if they could get a ticket. But I don't know. I would have to look at that. I can share with you that when I spoke with Alicia Graves and Lauren Schechter from the NAACP, we talked about some just what is the foundation for this bill? And they really wanted to go back to the data and incorporate more. And I suspect that may be where that language came from.
Well,
the
other thing this brings up for me, and this is something I've been passionate about for a while, is raising the age of culpability. I mean, right now, 10-year-olds can be arrested for anything. And we all know 10-year-old brains don't operate the same way as the brains of older kids. So that's sort of a tangent to this, but I disapprove of the age of culpability being so low.
Other thoughts or questions?
Yeah, I have a question. Kathleen, how will, from reading this, I'm a little bit confused on the concerns about truancy. And I know I've been to court with kids that are required to go for truancy, and sometimes it's the Child Protection Agency that has been involved, and sometimes the school district reports this. And so there is a court appearance. How would this impact that process that we currently have in place within our district?
Honestly, I am really impressed with the truancy work in this district. We have multiple levels of work that happen when a student is experiencing that chronic absenteeism. So we use a really robust system of engagement before we ever wind up in truancy court. Over the last year with the pandemic, we've really built those systems to be even stronger. We haven't had any truancy actions happening right now. We've just notified the court that we're working internally. So I think the references to truancy really are consistent with what you see happening in your district and our district currently. So I don't think it would limit that work or require anything new for us.
Okay. And I do thank you for going through step by step with us just a few minutes ago, because I agree with a lot of your concerns and analysis on it. I'm concerned on the whole thing. I'm probably one of the few that our own thoughts out there that this gets to the root cause of disproportionate discipline not being addressed. I think there's a lot of factors that we don't have the control over. Sometimes those are within the home, whether it be cultural or economic issues. But I have a concern because, having been in the classroom, there was one time I was taken down by a student, no bodily injury, but he took hold of my finger, pulled me all the way to the ground till I was on the floor. There was another time when one of my colleagues' tires were slit, and that was, I have several of the concerns that that Broomfield group wrote in about some specific examples. And I don't think that this bill is really getting to the root cause of when a crime's a crime, why are we disproportionately targeting some students and not others, if that's what we're doing? Or do we, so I just wanted to throw that out there for my whole view of the whole Senate bill being proposed. Thanks.
Yeah, Rob, you had your hand up.
I do. Thanks, Tina. Just to touch base on what Kathleen had mentioned, page 17, line 4, this idea that a student being arrested would be at the discretion of both a school resource officer, a law enforcement officer, and the school principal. I'm just not, I don't understand how that would work. And I don't understand, what training, right, that principals would need to have to be able to feel like they could make those decisions with confidence, that those decisions would then be consistent. That to me, I think I need to hear and know and understand more in regards to why that was added, and how you would actually work that out. Or is there, any other instance where somebody has the authority to decide who gets arrested or ticketed or not? Like, are there other examples that in law enforcement where that's the case? I'm not aware of any. So this would be, I understand what this bill is trying to do. I think that when you get into the nitty gritty of that piece in particular, I just don't understand how that would work. I don't understand. I just think that's a pretty significant concern for me.
Lisa, you had your.
I do. Sorry, I also have a 5-year-old.
I hear you. I hear you.
With a run over foot. Okay, let's see. Yes, generally I don't object to the bulk of the revisions. And you said Richard got in touch with you. He got in touch with me as well to share similar thoughts. I do agree with some concerns that Rob and Kathleen have mentioned. I assume the intention with the principal bit is to make sure there's a sort of a fail-safe, but I feel like it really harms that position of trust that we're hoping to have between our administrators and our students. So I'm certainly not wild about that section, but absent that, I feel good generally about the changes.
Kathy? Gepper?
I share that concern, and I think it goes farther down the page. This whole all of other available alternatives seems so subjective to me. I could just, I'm putting my lawyer hat on, which I shouldn't do, but I could just see, did you really pursue all? And what steps did you take to do all of these things? And it just, to me, opens up the principal and others who are implementing this to a lot of subjectivity from outside parties, feeling like we didn't really do what the law requires us to do when none of us would have been there at the time. I'm worried about the subjectivity of that whole part of the law. And I share what Rob said too, and Lisa.
Kathleen, what do you think about the subjectivity? I did feel that there are portions of the legislation that read somewhat as recommendations, not. So it's sort of interesting. I wasn't sure exactly what we had to do and what could be challenged in court. Do you have any sense?
Oh, I do think we'll get challenged on no other available alternatives. And I think we've reckoned with this, and I'm trying to think of where. Because I know that I've actually confronted this, and I'm just trying to think of the context. I would guess it was probably with a special education student, because we've seen similar language in the federal law. So I do think that becomes a concern. I think that there's a lot of very dense language here for administrators. Looking at no other available alternatives, and is it an imminent risk, and isn't it imminent risk of serious bodily injury? With board member Myers, if she's held by a finger and is being taken to the floor by a student, would we all agree that there's an imminent risk of serious bodily injury, that she would come up with a fractured bone or some other potentially disfiguring or life-ending sort of physical intervention? And that's the standard that's in this bill right now, particularly really deeply embedded because it uses serious bodily injury over and over and over again. And that's a very high legal standard.
Kitty?
Yeah, the serious bodily injury comes up for me as well. Because as I understand the law, a doctor has to say it was serious bodily injury, not the person who's injured. And they may or may not agree on what that is. And the other piece of it is, like looking at Donna's example, is how do you know whether or not that poses a risk? Like you were saying, I mean, it could be she fell down, she got a little bruise, maybe, or it could be she fell down and then the kid stomped on her neck. So it's a bit subjective.
Stacey?
I agree with the vagueness of the all other available alternatives, what Kathy said. And it also seems to me that looks different in every school, not just district, what all other available alternatives are. So I find that troublesome.
Donna, are you speaking?
I like that point, Stacy. And to you, Kathleen, I think we've both been in IEP meetings where so much discussion went around, have you used every alternative intervention? And the teacher didn't follow knew that this antecedent behavior happened, but kind of ignored it, or a substitute came in and hadn't read the IEP appropriately. Or did you call in your certified behavior analyst to analyze all of this behavior and come up with the best behavior plan? So there's so much vagueness, and it just brought to my mind, so much of of things that we've had to deal with within the special education realm.
Kathy?
I was just gonna say, the word that's really troubling is all. I mean, I know it'd still be subjective, but what if it said reasonable or something? But when it says all, anybody can almost come up with some scenario where you didn't do something that would fit under the catch-all for all. So I'm just trying to come up with something that would help soften that. And I think that's where I got stuck.
So I have a question. I remember that we developed new school discipline policies, and we wanted those policies to have community engagement. So we reached out to various groups in the community. And I think it took us 12 months, maybe. How long did it take us, do you all think? Anyone? Or did it just
No, a year at least. I mean, I think that, that is something that we had received a lot of feedback from our Latino Parent Advisory Council and others, and then through some of our equity summits that we did the first year I was here. And it became really the first big task to take on, not only the discipline policies, but, bullying, harassment policy, to make sure that those were designed in a way that they're being consistently implemented and reflected the values of our community. It took a year. And then even after you develop them, then, the creating the systems to track, monitor, and those other things, I believe this is the right work, right? I mean, I believe that in this bill, the idea that we should be looking at this and paying attention to this, I know that this reflects the values of our community, certainly, and the priorities within our strategic plan, but it will take a significant amount of work for districts that don't have the resources that we have.
So, and I don't believe, actually maybe we have, but I am not sure whether we've done all the training on our new discipline yet. So, but you don't have to answer that. But that is also part of this bill. I think what I'm getting at a little bit is just trying to understand, were this legislation to be passed, even with the changes in some of that we've talked down, and I've been taking notes on changes, and knowing that this is a district that supports the spirit and the intention of the bill 100%. We've already done this work in our district. Whether we could have it ready by August 15th with our staff trained and the systems in place, could we do it? Because one piece of feedback we might want to give back to our lobbyist is that we can fulfill the reporting requirement by August, but we can't fulfill the other requirements that we think probably need more stakeholding, with the possibility of dividing this bill in two. I don't know if that's something we can suggest, because I know there's also a sense of urgency, which I really respect. But I'm wondering, could our district do it? Could we have it ready for August 15th? And what would we give up if we did this?
I would say that anybody who takes on this work, you have to bring this a mindset of continuous improvement, right? I think that so to the extent that would everything be perfect by August 15th, I don't believe so. I think that we're going to continue to look at our policies, the way that we're collecting information, right? I think that as I think about what we've talked about today, I think about this education, accountability, and accreditation audit, right? And what is it that we're thinking about that schools should be focusing on? And that's really where the state, our accountability lies with the State Board of Education through these performance frameworks, how this piece could fit into that. And then, how do we make sure that each individual student who's faced with these situations, that we're thinking about each individual student and case, and then the overall system in general, knowing and understanding that we, as long as most districts have a lot of work to do in this area. But I would say that, Tina, it'll take some time to get this absolutely right. But I think that everybody's going to have to approach this with the idea that we're going to continuously get better.
Right, but if the bill is signed into law on May 20th, what do we do? I mean, because we're still kind of doing the pandemic and quarantines, and our staff, from what I can tell, already have a couple jobs going on. And I'm a little concerned about us failing to meet the requirements and then dealing with litigation. I mean, is that even a possibility, or is there enough latitude in this bill that we'd be okay for the first 6 months, or do we ask for it to go into effect in January of 2022? How does that? I don't even know what our options are. Anyone? Does it have an effective date?
It has a safety clause. It says it's necessary for public safety, so it would have an immediate effect.
Okay.
Which for us might work, since our data systems we've converted them. We did that last summer. It will be really challenging. If it had come down this way to us last spring, it would have been really challenging to implement, because we took the summer to overhaul our Infinite Campus and our data systems to be consistent with the federal and state definitions.
Okay.
So, and I would say we've trained our administrators all year long on the new discipline policies. That's the Vortex work. We've trained them every month, and we did a big training before the school year began. I think if this bill passed, we would have to do that again. We would have to take time that our people really want to spend focused on closing the achievement gap. And we would have to give them very detailed legal training about how to respond to this sort of student conduct, so that they are really understand the protocols if that conduct occurs.
Okay.
I still am concerned with all of those things that you've mentioned, Tina, as well as Kathleen, what you've done. And I still go back to my question as, does this really solve the problem? I think for some districts, they're not set up as nicely as we have been. But I also look at it in comparison to how districts are I can't think of another word except deemed for having so many dropouts, or part of your adequate yearly progress becomes it's impacted and so some districts just started passing kids and graduating kids without giving them the skills necessary that they needed. What I worry about this whole bill is that, in order to comply, crimes go unreported, or severe infractions, people feel that their hands are tied. So that's throwing my additional thoughts out there. Thank you.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is concern particularly around the all other available alternatives, the serious bodily injury, the joint decision making on page 17, the language that a charter school can waive it, but not a school district. And I personally think we should oppose the bill if that's not remedied, because I think it's going to get too confusing with our relationships with law enforcement. I don't know how anyone feels about that, but I don't, or we should ask for school districts to be able to waive it. What, Katie?
I said, I agree with you on that. All the schools should be held to the same standard, not just non-charter schools.
And then
my dog agrees too.
We hadn't had a good animal showing up recently, so thank you, Kitty. And also the piece about the school tracks the referrals, law enforcement tracks arrests. So that I'm wondering if we feel, and then the issue that it doesn't sound to me yet that there's ongoing funding tied to this bill. There is startup funding from what I can tell. And I would imagine we'd want to advocate again for ongoing funding so we could hire the people necessary to do the intervention, the restorative practices, et cetera, which we're going to do anyway. But to meet all of the requirements, we might need more. I'm not sure, Rob or Bill, if that's accurate.
About how much money we would need to do the things, or the ongoing nature of it?
Yeah, to comply with the bill, how much will it cost us in addition to what we've already committed with our new discipline policies?
We haven't done a deep analysis on that. It is kind of tricky as the bill keeps changing or ideas keep changing for that. But suffice it to say, the state doesn't have a great mechanism for funding programs in an ongoing basis statewide.
Right.
They have a way to do grants, and usually those are not permanent ongoing. Some of them last multiple years, certainly, but they don't have a good mechanism for it.
Okay.
Amen to that.
All right, so I feel like we've collected feedback, but we also know that this is going to evolve. So I'll just continue to share this type of feedback along with staff. This isn't just me, by the way. I'm just running the meeting. Our staff is obviously involved, so I would definitely not be the expert on these topics. So we can continue to give that feedback, and then we'll also listen to what other groups are saying, because it just seems to keep coming in. Is everyone feeling comfortable with that? That we still support the spirit of the bill and the intention, and we're just worried about some of the details and what they mean. Yeah, Lisa.
Just sharing that I'm going to another stakeholder meeting on this tonight, and if there's anything relevant, I'm happy to pass it on after.
Okay, thank you. All right. That's about it. Is everyone okay with where we are today on some legislative issues? Okay, we're meeting next Tuesday for a regular board meeting. So if you have other legislative issues you want to bring on and put on the agenda, while we have the legislative update, if we're going to bring up something specific, it's nice to have noticed that specifically. So just send it over to me or Rob. All right. Thanks. Have a good day.